Now let's talk about the state as a successor of money and the molder of personality. There was nothing definite left but the state to fill the economic and spiritual vacuum created by the German hyperinflation. And now we're getting to the juicy part with Adolf Hitler, so I take a drink here. Now, a shrewd and cunning German politician, Adolf Hitler, understood the nature of inflation as a gigantic material and spiritual swindle, and recognized the deforming of German souls and personalities, and the corresponding disintegration of German society. Hitler both taunted the German people for acquiescing in the swindle, and at the same time promised them material relief and spiritual regeneration in the state, the successor of money. Hyde reported that Hitler told the following story at a meeting in the summer of 1923. So Hyde was a very close follower of Hitler. And so this is Hyde now talking about Hitler. Quote, "We have just had this is what Hitler said, according to Hyde. We have just had a big gymnastic festival in Munich. 300,000 athletes from all over the country assembled here. That must have brought our city lots of business, you think. There was an old woman who sold picture postcards. She was glad because the festival would bring her plenty of customers. She was beside herself with joy when sales far exceeded her expectations. Business had been really good, or so she thought. But now the old woman is sitting in front of an empty shop crying her eyes out. For with the miserable paper money she took in for her cards, she can't buy 1/100th of her old stock." This is monetary miscalculation. "Her business is ruined, her livelihood absolutely destroyed. She can go begging. And the same despair is seizing the whole people. We are facing a revolution." Now that's Hitler talking, okay? He had very deep insight into this destruction wrought by hyperinflation. Hitler perceptively noted that once the government had begun to run the printing presses full time, it was from that moment doomed to continue the swindle, and that was always Hitler's word for the inflation, until the bitter end of a hyperinflationary breakdown. He saw that. Stopping the monetary expansion would reveal to workers that their real income was substantially less than they realized, and much was being siphoned off to pay reparations to foreign powers as mandated by the Treaty of Versailles. This revelation would spell the downfall of the government. In the meantime, people's confidence in the established moral and social order associated with capitalism would be shattered, as the vicious would replace the virtuous at the top of the socio-economic structure. Proclaimed Hitler in his daily newspaper in 1923, quote, "The government goes on calmly printing these scraps. Because if it stopped, that would mean the end of government. Because once the printing press is stopped, and that is the prerequisite for the stabilization of the mark," and that's Hitler's words, and it sounds like Mises there, "the swindle would at once be brought to light. For then the worker would realize that he's only making 1/3 of what he made in peacetime. Believe me, our misery will increase. The scoundrel will get by, but the decent, solid businessman who doesn't speculate will be utterly crushed. First the little fellow on the bottom, but in the end, the big fellow on top too. But the scoundrel and swindler will remain top and bottom. The reason? Because the state itself has become the biggest swindler and crook, a robber's state." Now, although Hitler spoke, end of quote. Now, although Hitler spoke more truly and perceptively about the nature and effects of inflation than the current Fed chairman and establishment macroeconomists, his intent was not to present a program for abolishing the robber's state and restoring sound money, private property, and the moral and social order of capitalism. Rather, Hitler sought to frighten and shame the propertyless, demoralized, and atomized German masses into abandoning the venal and short-sighted socialist politicians of the Weimar Republic and to seek salvation in a dictatorial state run by his National Socialist movement. Accordingly, Hitler warned that people who are earning billions of marks would literally starve to death. The farmer will stop selling his products for worthless billions. Now here I'm quoting Hitler, with which he can paper his outhouse on the manure heap, unquote. What Hitler hoped to bring about was what he called, quote, "the revolt of the starving billionaires," unquote. Okay. According to Hitler, I'm quoting, "if the horrified people can starve on billions, they must arrive at this conclusion. We will no longer submit to a state which is built on the swindling idea of the majority. We want dictatorship," unquote. Hitler, however, used more than fear to motivate his listeners. He capitalized on the self-contempt of those who had been swindled out of their property and moral values, and whose sense of self had been shattered. He saw that persons such as these had reverted to the unformed state of adolescence and were ready to follow a leader, a Führer, to reconstruct their own moral codes and personalities according to the artificial collectivist and nationalist idea projected in the leader's twisted vision. Hitler addressed and chastised the German people accordingly. And I'm quoting Hitler, "The German people is made up of children, for only a childish people will accept million-mark bills. True, a third of the German people are heroes, but another third are fools, and the last third are cowards. True strength is a quality of a few men, or else we would not have the word hero. The masses consist of average men, Democrats. Cowardly men choose the most cowardly as their leaders, so that they won't have to show courage. And they choose the stupidest among the stupid, so that everyone can have the feeling that he's a little bit better than the leader. A people subjected to the decisions of the majority is on the road to ruin," unquote. Now, Haydn insightfully connected Hitler's aim, his speeches on hyperinflation, with the derangement of Hitler's own personality as a product of the same moral, economic, and social catastrophe of hyperinflation. Haydn characterized the link as follows. And this is one of the best characterizations of Hitler I've read. Quote, "It was the artificial building of a new national character, an ersatz character," that is a fake replacement for a real personality, "an ersatz character, an attitude created in accordance with an artificial plan. The people dream, and the soothsayer, Hitler, tells them what they are dreaming. This continuous, domineering, yet intimate conversation with the people could only be carried on by a man who was people, an enemy of the people in one, a torn personality who felt himself a trampled fragment of the people in his own downtrodden, miserable nonentity, and rebelled with the people against this destiny, but who at the same time was convinced of the absolute necessity of trampling, coercing, and shaking the master's fist," unquote. Hitler not only used his theme of the degeneration and reconstruction of personality as a rhetorical device, he developed it into one of the fundamental principles of the National Socialist philosophy in a chapter entitled, and this is from Mein Kampf, "Personality and the Conception of the Folkish State," as in folk, the German word for people. Hitler went on to elaborate his vision of the National Socialist state, whose, quote, "chief task he saw as, quote, educating and preserving the bearer of the state. Underlying the state would be a philosophy that, quote, builds not upon the idea of the majority, but upon the idea of personality." Okay, those are Hitler's words. For Hitler, personality was born of the inventive ideas and creative actions of especially able individuals, but only reached its full realization in the organized state, and especially the leadership of that state. Individuals do not possess personality, in Hitler's view, but are possessed and molded by it. Their being does not emanate from within, but invades from without. And that's my description of what Hitler's saying. And now Hitler, in his words, he writes, "A man's first intelligent measures in the struggle with other beasts assuredly originate in the actions of individual, particularly able subjects. Here, too, the personality was once unquestionably the cause of decisions and acts which later was taken over by all humanity and regarded as perfectly self-evident. The most valuable thing about the invention itself, whether it lie in the material field or in the world of ideas, is primarily the inventor as a personality. Therefore, to employ him in a way benefiting the totality is the first and highest task in the organization of a national community. Indeed, the organization itself must be a realization of this personality principle. Thus, also, it is redeemed from the curse of mechanism and becomes a living thing. That is, the state becomes a living thing." According to Hitler, this, what he called the selective process of personality, is the most natural principle, of his words, the most natural principle. It pervades and organizes all fields of human endeavor, including thought, art, and economic life. Indeed, Hitler argued, quote, "The idea of personality is everywhere dominant. Its authority downward